Good morning. It's 3 minutes after 10. I hope you had a splendid weekend. It happened to me. Would you believe? Someone as cynical and as sceptical and as wise, I like to think, as me. I came within nanoseconds of being a victim of an online fraud. So I my ears pricked up at that story. We will return to it a little later in the programme. I'll tell you what, I'm seriously, nanoseconds. I was one button away from losing about £1,000, losing about £1,000. So I've completely changed my view. I used to rather unkindly think anyone who falls for that kind of stuff must be a bit of a flump. But my apologies. And we shall look at some of the more imaginative or lesser known examples of that kind of crime later in the programme. It's 4 minutes after 10. I want to begin with housing. And I want to talk about it because, well, I know this is a phrase that probably doesn't strike joy into your heart, but Michael Gove said something interesting. He essentially talked about the threat to democracy itself that is posed by adults who have either never left home or who are returning home well into their 20s, 30s and beyond. The number of first-time buyers is falling. The cost of living crisis, sky-high rents, rising house prices, all of this poses possibly an existential threat to the political order. It's Michael Gove thinking that possibly democracy itself, or certainly capitalism, as most of us understand it, could be under threat. I'd never know quite how to have this conversation because I think that I just squeaked over the line. You know, like when the shutters are coming down on a shop and you roll underneath it just before it reaches the ground, or the just about to pull the gate across at a gig and you just manage to wiggle your way. Just wiggle's a good word. I've turned into Lee Anderson. I'm inventing words now. You wiggle. What a great word. Why is wiggle not a word? You wiggle your way in. Just at the very last minute. It's like a cross between a squeeze and a wiggle. You wiggle your... That's a wonderful word. That's my gift to the world. The word wiggle. You wiggle your way in at the very last minute. I was like that. You just got over the line. You're watching the clock count down and you just get to the bank So I just got over the line. I don't come from money. My dad and mum spent any money they had on our educations. And by the time that we left school, there wasn't much left because my dad's employment situation had changed. So there was never any cash for me to sort of fall back on. Any property purchasing my wife and I did was going to be 100% self-generated. And I'm not very good at saving and things like that, but I was quite good at earning back in the day. I climbed up the greasy pole of national newspapers, looking back surprisingly quickly to the point where we could buy a place when we got married. And we bought it with a 110% mortgage. I've mentioned this to you before, and I apologise for the repetition, but I think it's really important. Because one thing I'm never going to be guilty of is falling into the trap of thinking that being 28 now is in any way similar to being 28 when I was 28. Not only has the multiple relationship between income and average house price got even bigger, got even worse, but the access to cheap money, the access to cheap mortgages has ceased to exist. So there's reasons why I get confused about this stuff. One of the reasons I get confused about this stuff is housing is a finite resource. So what do you see what I mean? There's like a sort of big cloud of confusion about to appear in your brain because, okay, so you can't afford it now like I could when I was 28, but what happens to it? It's still there. The flat that I bought when I was 28, right, didn't magically materialise as a consequence of me being able to afford it. The flat was there. And then we bought it. But if we hadn't bought it, it would still have been there. And someone else would have bought it. So I don't quite understand the relationship between supply and demand, supply and shortages, particularly when an awful lot of this is caused by cost, and as opposed to a breakdown in supply and demand. So I'm fascinated by what it does to you. But I'm very conscious of sounding even smugger than usual. I fully believe that if I was 28 now, even having made something of an impact in the profession that I had chosen, I was a show business editor of a national newspaper, which is a pretty cool job. And back then it was quite well paid. I don't think it is now. So if I was 28 now, I wouldn't be close to getting on the property ladder. I would be hoping that the influence of my new wife would introduce some responsibility to my existence, and we'd actually be able to save up a significant deposit. But it would take ages, and we'd be paying rent in the meantime. There's no sort of prospect of living at home if you're working in London and your mum lives in Kidderminster. It's not an option. And what I don't know is what it does to you, because you can't compare the you that you are with the you that you would be. I can almost compare the you that I am with the you that I would be. I can imagine being 28. I can look at what things cost now. I can look at what the relationship is between income and house prices. And I can certainly empathise, but I think it's a more effective mental exercise to imagine what you would feel like. And one of the things you do subconsciously is watch. You watch it grow, the value of your home. Until relatively recently. I mean, there was periods 20 years ago and less where you would earn more in a year from the value of your home than you would from your actual income. And that obviously is part of the reason why the problems are where they are now. 10 minutes after 10 is the time. You need a bloody question, don't you? You need a question. You're so demanding. Honestly, it's Monday morning. I hit the ground. Right, you need a question before you can ring me, don't you? You need a question. What's the question? I mean, I do think the question of how has this happened is really interesting because of that confusion that I have surrounding supply and demand. You can't. So who's in the house you would be in if you had more money? Do you see? Am I sounding really stupid? Who is living in the home that you would be living in if you had a deposit? If you could get a mortgage? Are you living in it? But paying rent to the private landlord? Are you living in it? You're living in the home that you would own, but instead of paying your own mortgage, you're paying your landlord's mortgage. In which case, and I think it's sometimes a bit of a lazy swing. I was a private landlord for a while, largely by accident, but that doesn't excuse my moral culpability for the crisis that was sweeping the country at the time. Who is in the home that you would own if the economic situation, if the economic landscape was the same now as it was in the year 2000 when I became a property owner? Who's in it? Is it private landlords? So you are in it, but you're paying their mortgage when you can prove. I've said that to you before, haven't I? It's not that you can't afford to pay a house. It's just you can't afford to buy it for yourself. You've got the monthly outgoings. You can buy it. The problem is it's the landlord's mortgage that you're paying off. So that's the problem. It's a bit of a lazy swing, but there are other programs on this radio station where the tone can sometimes sound as if it's National Save the Landlord Week. So I think we can have a little bit of balance. I think that private landlords are obviously a large contributor to the problems that the country currently faces, to the problem of not being able to buy a home for yourself because you're busy buying it for your landlord on a buy-to-let mortgage. But that's changed a little bit. 12 minutes after 10 is the time. I just glance at the text. Here you go. Ben's been in touch to blame immigrants, which obviously the volume of humanity is going to be part of the question of supply and demand. But why you'd be cross with a nurse from Kenya and not with someone over the road who's got 7 children, or Boris Johnson's output of children? If you cross about the number of humans that are seeking accommodation, it seems to me a little bit lazy and possibly racist to reach first for the foreigners. But hey, that's just me. But who's living in that home? Who is living in the home that you would be living in if the economic landscape in 2024 was the same as what it was in the year 2000? 12 minutes after 10 is the time. So that is one way into the question of how has this happened? How has this happened? Hit the numbers now, you will get through, right? So that's something everyone can play with. 0345 6060 973. Now, the next question is a trickier one. And I don't even know if you've thought about it before, but I want you to try to compare you now with who you would be if the economic landscape in 2024 was the same as it was in 2000. So, by the way, in the year 2000, people like Ben were still blaming immigrants for everything. So that certainly isn't the major driver of change or decline, because the rhetoric of blaming foreigners for absolutely everything in this country is just a gift, isn't it, to the people who are really responsible. But what does it do to you, do you think? I don't know that we've ever had a phone-in before based upon the wisdom of Michael Gove, but he's got a point here, albeit a self-serving one. He's worried about the Conservative Party ceasing to exist as a viable political force in the mind of generations that can't ever get on the property ladder. But what does it do to you? What does it do to you? I used to do this phone-in, bearing in mind how long I've had this job. So 10 years ago, we would have this conversation. 5 years ago, we would have this conversation from the perspective of growing up through childhood and into teenage years and always just presuming that that would be the next thing along on the conveyor belt. You remember the generation game. If you're a certain age, you had to memorize all the prizes on the conveyor belt. Cuddly toy, teas made, selection of cheeses. I don't think they ever had a selection of cheeses. But that would be, so for someone of my background and class, socioeconomic class, you went to school and then you went to university and then you rented for a bit and then you got on the property ladder. And somehow I think that informs my relationship with the society in which I live. So the first time you got the keys, I remember, we met the estate agent in a pub actually, in West London and got the keys for our own place. It was a sort of curious combination of romance, because it was our first home together. We just got back from honeymoon. A curious combination of romance and maturity, actually. Crikey, we're grown-ups now. But I think it was costing us less than we were paying together in rent to actually have our own place with a mortgage. And it changed the nature of my relationship with society, I think. I'm not someone who knows the price of everything or indeed the value of nothing. But I don't have like columns in my head of money and what I should be doing. I'm not good like that. I could be a lot better, but I'm a homeowner. And that, I think that increases the sense of stake that I have in society. I really do. And listen, I'd take all the accusations of smugness that you want, but it is normal for someone in their early 50s to have become a homeowner in their late 20s, right? It's just normal. It's not particularly privileged. It was just normal, and it's not now. And I want to know what that changes. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And there is a little bit of a conundrum here, isn't there, for the racists? Because if the property shortages are caused in large part by immigration, people buying their own homes, well, then they can't be scroungers, can they? Because they're paying tax and earning sufficient amounts of money to buy their own homes in a market where it's really hard to buy your own home. So you can't simultaneously be responsible for the housing shortage and a drain on the economy, because if you're a homeowner, you're the opposite of a drain on the economy, unless it could be argued you're a private landlord, like Jeremy Hunt and various other members of the cabinet. Is that the big one? The proliferation of buy-to-let mortgages, because they can never do anything about that, the politicians. And do you know why? I love this. So you sit here and you think, I know, we can fix this really easily. We'll make it much harder to be a landlord, make it much less financially rewarding to be a landlord. There's one enormous reason why that could never happen in this country. And I bet if you don't know already what it is, then I'll tell you after this, actually. And I'll leave you thinking, what is the single most enormous reason why no government in the United Kingdom could ever go in very hard on landlords? I'll tell you in a moment. But before that, you tell me, what's going on in the housing market and what does the lack of home ownership do to your sense of society, your sense of stakeholding in the society that we all inhabit? 0345 6060 973. It is 21 minutes after 10. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Michael Gove has said something sensible. Stop all the clocks. Scare the horses. He's essentially said that if you can't get on the property ladder, you could feel that democracy and capitalism don't work. And I just wonder where you sit on that. And you'd need to be different from me. You need to feel shut out of the system. Maybe you don't, but if you do, what does it do to you? Adam's in Croydon. Adam, what would you like to say?
On what end of the question? So what does it do to me?
Whatever you rang in to say, mate. Sorry, you know me. I go off on tangents. But whatever prompted you to pick... I should say, why did you pick up the phone? That's what I normally say to people.
Because you're talking about me.
Right.
I have tried to get on the property ladder several times, whether it be buying the rented property that I'm in, because I had the opportunity to do so, or right back at the beginning when I wanted to buy a flat. When I was 16, I was able to buy a flat, but obviously not 18. When I was 18, I was told I needed a sizable deposit that I didn't have.
Right.
The years went on, and basically every time I got a financial increase in my situation or managed to get some money behind me, it was never enough.
Right. How old are you now?
I am 39.
39. You've got a big one coming up, mate. You should be on your toes.
Well.
So go on. What does it do? So you understand exactly what I'm talking about then. What does it do to you, this sense of being shut out?
Well, I can never retire. I can never provide anything for my children in form of financial help because I will always be paying rent. Having to find £2,000 a month if there's no increases in any way, shape, or form.
After tax.
Yeah, of course, after tax. And let's be frank and honest. I'm on an okay salary, but there's no way my retirement is ever going to give me that, and that's without bills, etc., etc. So I can never ever retire. It's not possible unless something massive changes. I blame the government and, in part, private landlords, because that's the reason why I feel that the house prices have increased. Because it's guaranteed money. Someone has to live there. If other people can't buy it, I might as well buy it as a private landlord, if only I could, because somebody's going to have to pay there. But
I mean, the percentages aren't huge. I think, I don't know if it's even as high as 10%, the amount of private landlords taking up percentage of the property market. So it's part of the problem, but it's not the only problem.
It's not the only problem. I think it's being shored up by the government to stop the housing from plummeting back to where it was before. But you need the ebbs and flows to keep people on the market, on the ladder. If it just goes up and it only ever goes up, why would anyone want to sell it?
It gets tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. Just leave it empty and watch the income, as it were, increase.
Exactly. Now you've got less houses.
Well, I don't know how many are empty. That might be the big thing. So hang on, because I want to crack on. Sorry, there's loads of people waiting. But does it? Because that's bleak. I mean, and I wonder how many people listening, possibly a bit younger than you, haven't clocked that they're in the same boat that you're in. I'm never going to have that thing to fall back on. You know, that wealth behind me, that capital. There you go. It's capital. It's literally capital. What does it do? Does it change the way you think? Does it change the way you think about society? Does it change the way you feel?
It angers me if I think about it. I try not to think about it. My last few years before retirement should be relaxing and able to spend a bit of money. And my colleagues can do that because they've paid their mortgage off. Yeah. I will never be able to not rent. And I mean, and for anybody, anybody in your boat who, sorry, Adam, I did warn you I was going to move on. So I know you've got a lot else to say, but there's loads of other people in similar situations. And I mean, you know, you don't have the prospect of an inheritance on the horizon. Some people will, but that is the only way out of the situation you describe. What does it do for our politics, I wonder? Does it make you disengaged? Do you sort of step back from the fray because you don't feel it's about you? Molly's in Southampton. Molly, what would you like to say?
Hiya. So I've got a situation which I think a lot of people are in. Yeah. Me and my husband broke up 2 years ago.
Right.
And basically just couldn't afford to properly separate in terms of our living situation.
Yeah.
We've got 2 children. My son's got SEN needs. He's autistic and things like that. So we're obviously need to take that into consideration as well. But we were working out that our month as a unit, our outgoings would go from about £2,000 a month to £5,000 depending on where I'd have to rent.
Yeah.
For me to get a 3-bedroom house, which is what I'd need. I have a boy and a girl and things like that, and he obviously needs his own space. So you're in Southampton, you're looking at £1,500 a month for a 3-bedroom house. And then even to go and view the property, so I couldn't even view anywhere without proving that I earned at least one property was £47,000 a year, no guarantor.
What, so pay slips? You had to provide pay slips to the estate agent?
Before you are vetted before you can even view a property.
Gosh.
So you have to explain your financial circumstances. Some of them were no guarantors. It's ridiculous. So, and then one estate agent said to me, "Oh, there is one solution. You could pay a year's rent up front."
So this is just to rent a place. This is just to find a place to rent, not to buy.
No. So we own our house. So I live.
You're still living with your ex, are you?
Yeah, and luckily we get on relatively okay. When it comes to the children, you know, we're lucky like that.
Sure.
He is a head of department in a secondary school. We should not be struggling, you know, like I remember my parents when I was growing up, one of them had to work and you got by, like, okay, we weren't really well off, but you could get by. And I think that's the cost of living and everything involved. I mean, I was just telling your researcher, I spent £400 on food in 2.5 weeks. And I sort of asked all my friends with the same amount of kids and similar things. And they were like, yeah, that's probably about right. You know, I thought I'd been really excessive. And that's just how much it costs to feed So the
idea of saving up to get a deposit, or I mean, if you sold the place you're in now, the splitting it 2 ways it wouldn't get you anywhere. Thank you. But what does it do to you? Forgive me, because this sounds a bit mawkish or voyeuristic almost, but. What you've just described, that sense, this isn't supposed to happen to us because of where you sit socioeconomically and what your ex does for a living. But what does it do to you politically? Does it make you disengage? Does it feel like the cogs are turning but they're not actually connecting with each other sometimes, or what?
It doesn't make me disengage because I'm really interested in politics and things. Like, I listen to you every day. I love listening to it all. But if I was, I'm lucky enough to look at it from like more of a political point of view, but I am very overwhelmed a lot of the time at the thought of the future. And I've brought my children up. My ex-husband had a career and he's done very well. Yeah. But obviously, when we sell our house, he is in a position where he can take his money from the house.
He's got his income. He can prove his income.
I can't do that. I'd have to use the £20,000 for a year's worth of rent up front was the solution I was offered by an estate agent, which is my children's. That's all I have for my children.
Well, yeah, but also that's a deposit for a mortgage, so you could be paying your own mortgage instead of your landlord's if you've managed to get that chunk of change in place at the same time. Ollie, thank you. I mean, depressing is probably the word I'd use to describe the fact that the phones are ringing off the hook. It's true. And whether or not Michael Gove is going to butter any parsnips by drawing attention to it, any political parsnips, I do not know. But this seems to me to be a hugely important issue that successive governments, but particularly the last 14 years, have only made worse. It's 10:30. I forgot to tell you, didn't I? It's the King. It's the King. It's not, lots of you are suggesting it's all the MPs who are also private landlords. It's the King. It's the Crown Estate. The biggest landlords in the country came over with William the Conqueror or live in palaces and castles. The Crown Estate, the Duchy of Cornwall, the Duke of Westminster. What do you think owns all those properties? So how are they going to bring in a meaningful law to make it less attractive to be a landlord when you'd be undermining the 1,000-year-old traditions that were started shortly after the Norman conquest? Thomas Watts is here now with your headline. It is 10:34. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. What does it do to society? Go on, it's Monday. We've got lots of energy. Put your thinking cap on. What does it do to society? This is generational now. Looking at my switchboard, I absolutely bonkers already. People, and I thought Molly put it very well, put it very sympathetically, people who just didn't expect to be in this situation, people who presumed they would be homeowners, now addressing the fact that they perhaps never will be. Even going backwards in the event of splitting up and not being able to buy two properties. So you move into rental. And my friend Wayne, who used to be, I'm sure he won't mind me saying, he used to wax quite lyrical about renting. It used to use that old derivation from the French. It's like a death tax, isn't it? And a mort gorge, that's where the word comes from. And he'd say to me, look, my fridge breaks, I phone my landlord, he replaces it. But he's saying, he's 42 years old and I have naffle to show for it. I can't use the Anglo-Saxon word that he deploys in this tweet. I've paid over £200,000 in rent. What's the point? Then that's political. I mean, that is someone in society and yet not in it, subsidising someone else's fairly considerable wealth. I'm not down on landlords. I'm completely not down on landlords. But neither do we ignore the fact that Wayne is buying a flat for somebody else by paying that money every month that could be going towards a mortgage, but in the absence of a deposit. And then you've got 99% mortgages on the horizon today in one newspaper report, which I think would that solve the problem, or would that just get a few more people onto the lifeboat? I don't know. But what does it do to your relationship with society? John's in Brighton. John, what would you like to say?
Hey, James.
Hello, mate.
I'm a 28-year-old renter. Been renting for the last 10 years. I think it's just uncertainty that's just constantly hanging over you. We've had a no-fault eviction before.
Right.
Been turfed out basically because they wanted to rise the rent by about a third.
Because they could. They think they could find. They were confident they could find someone who could pay it.
Well, exactly, and this is it. You've got a situation where you can't complain about things. You're not really a real person at that point because you're constantly having to think about the whims of someone else who could turf you out at any moment. And even if you've got a good job, I've got quite a good salary.
Yes.
So is my partner. It's just nowhere near on the horizon. You can't get onto that, next moment really, where maybe can't even consider having kids. You can't think about that stuff really.
When did you realise?
When did I realise that this was the case?
Yeah, because when you were 18, you didn't. You were 18. I'll rent for a few years and then I'll move. So when because I mean, it's interesting that you're 28. That's exactly the age I was when I got a 110% mortgage. And without that, I think I'd be where you are now. If this was 24 years ago.
I don't know. To be honest, I don't think it's really been something that's ever been on my horizon. I don't have any inheritance coming through the pipe.
No.
So it's really down to me if I'm ever going to get to that moment. But yeah, I'd probably say it's not even that there was a moment I realised. It's never been within a grasp because of the conditions. My parents were the same. They had 100%. Well, they had a 100% mortgage, but it was half rent, half like a shared ownership thing.
So it's as if the social contract is changing from your generation to mine, isn't it? Is that sense of stakeholding is going?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's definitely, it's creating a lot of resentment, I feel, definitely around, our generation. Really, it's a ladder being pulled up, etc. So
and of course that makes your generation, and oddly across Europe, we're quite good at this, despite the efforts of people like Farage and the rest of them. It does perhaps make your generation susceptible to the old snake oil of blaming it all on incomers or on foreigners. But at the moment, that doesn't seem to have much traction because, I suppose, you can actually see the reality of the situation, and the reality is a no-fault eviction from your landlord. It's not moving a refugee into the home that would otherwise be yours. It's the economics of the situation, not the demographics, I think.
Well, I think, and as well, also the issue is now, there's always that same old saying when anyone's made a bit of buck, they say something like, well, we've worked really hard for it. And then the social contract's changed in the fact of everyone bloody works hard. Sorry.
no, that's perfect. It's one of my It's one of my absolute bugbears. Whatever the subject is, it's usually private education. We work jolly hard to send our child. Everyone else is just really coasting it. Everyone else is just swinging the lead. Everyone else is just sitting on a deck chair drinking lager all day. Yeah, I know. And that's Molly touched on that as well. And I think this is really significant. That sense that the deal has changed and it's now really unfair because for good or for ill, if you're thinking about the end of the line, you're thinking about retirement. The first caller, I think, made that point really starkly. You've got no nest egg. You've got nothing there. And if rents were cheap, like they are in some European countries, Austria is a remarkable model for rent control and huge swathes of social housing. If you've got low rent, you can have savings. If you've got high rent and impossible entry into the housing market, it's the worst of all imaginable worlds. unless you're a private landlord, like the Chancellor of the bloody Exchequer. Billy's in Ventnor on the Isle of Wight. Billy, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James.
Hello.
I want to sort of give you my position and just sort of tell you where I'm coming from my angle. So I spent 2 years in Watford, having qualified to be a teacher, and then I sort of uprooted myself and moved back down to where all my family are on the Isle of Wight, because the housing and the rent just kept going up and up and up. And it was really, for me, James, the cost of living crisis, in sort of combination with everything else, that pushed me to make that decision. But even when I was in Watford teaching, within the first year, I moved into a flat with my flatmate at the time in High Wycombe, and we had to commute 50 minutes a day. And I know that's not the worst thing in the world to do, but
it's not ideal, is it?
Well, it isn't. It isn't ideal, and the picture I'm trying to paint is exactly what I phoned up to say to you and your producer that I spoke to, and that was that you just end up buying out of the society that you're in, and I think it's really sad.
This is every call. It doesn't happen very often. The idea that we have found a seam of lived experience that is, to be fair, Michael Gove seems to be aware of it, albeit that he's more worried about it for political reasons than empathetic reasons. And you're a teacher, so you should be a valued member of society, and yet the message you're getting from society is that you're not valued enough to be a homeowner.
Well, do you know what? I'll be entirely honest with you, and I'm going to give you some financial details here.
Okay. Only if you're sure. I don't want to pry.
Oh, of course. No, you can dig as much as you want, James. Like, one of the things I love about listening to you is you're the only presenter that digs and puts things under the microscope, and I'm grateful for that.
That's very kind.
But I don't want to make you sort of blush with compliments.
No, stop. That's enough.
I know you won't.
Enough about me. Enough about me. Tell me more about you. Well, so go on. Tell me the detail that you were going to share.
So, in a nutshell, really, it's a good thing that it happened, because I love being back home with my family. But actually, the trigger point that made me take an $8,000 pay cut and a demotion was because of the cost of housing. And it's cheaper to live over here. And at the moment, although I'm living with my dad, it is cheaper over here to rent a 2-bedroom flat, so I can have a whole extra spare bedroom to myself, than it was to stay up in Watford on an $8,000 pay rise and a promotion, effectively. And I just think, what is the world coming to when somebody is working their butt off for 40, 50 hours a week, and they can't even afford to get even a shared ownership property? And I think that was the best I was looking at.
Yeah, I know, and you're not alone. There's a medic in one newspaper today who is renting a room in a home chair with a landlady. She's got quite a good deal on it, but she's a 26-year-old NHS medic, and again, key workers is the phrase we're looking for: teachers, doctors, nurses. It's bizarre, actually, the more you think about it. As Billy, far too young at the age of 27 to be using the phrase, what is the world coming to? But my goodness me, he's right. What is the world coming to when a teacher can't afford to live anywhere near the school that they work in, or indeed can't afford to buy a home anywhere in the country? Practically. This is enormous, isn't it? This is absolutely sort of epic. Should we have a look at Idiot's Corner? Here's John in Idiot's Corner. Did your fantastic Labour Party do anything about this topic when they were in power? John, it's 2024. The Labour Party haven't been in power since 2010. I appreciate you listening to this thinking, maybe we're the bad guys. Maybe these people that I've been voting for all my life are actually greedy hooligans. But it is such a stupid contribution to the conversation. And the short answer is yes. The situation was much less bad when the Tories came into power than it is now. And one of the areas where this perhaps is most acute is in the area of empty homes. There's a fascinating organisation called Action on Empty Homes that Corpsey has alerted me to or reminded me of. And the numbers they've got, in 2023 alone, there's about a 5% increase in the number of empty homes. So 261,189 long-term empty homes. I mean, what is that about? Actually, that's another question. 0345 606 0973. What is that about? It's 10:45. Here is what the kids call a thread. It's a great thread. And it is from one of my favourite Twitter contributors who always brings something new to the programme. He tweets as no hostages 00. particularly good on Irish politics and Irish history, but the man that I don't even know if it is a man. The accounts talents have no limit. Listen to this, it's quite long. The crisis is not born of a single cause, but a web of systemic failures. At its core is the uncoupling of wages from productivity. Asset price increases, like houses, continually outstrip wage growth, making them unaffordable. The chasm between average wages and house prices yawns wider than at any time since the 19th century, turning what should be a basic right into a luxury. And there are graphs and statistics to back up these points. They go on. The hurdles to home ownership are not just about the staggering price tags. The deposits required to secure a mortgage have ballooned, becoming insurmountable. For many, they went up by 76% between 2012 and 2022. So there's old John in Idiot's Corner. That's a 76% rise in deposits since between 2012 and 2022. Meanwhile, the construction of new homes lags woefully behind demand. Housing completions have dwindled. The number of completions in 1966 was double that in 2016, which kind of silences the immigration obsessives as well, doesn't it? Amid all this, the buy-to-let market thrives, fueled by the investments of older generations with more substantial savings and income. This dynamic has inflated rental costs as landlords capitalise on the scarcity of affordable homes. It's all here. And the result? A vicious cycle where the young and less affluent are priced out, forced to rent at ever-increasing costs, or return to their parents. It's not just a housing crisis, it's a stark reflection of widening inequality, which can only further destabilise the UK. And you'll remember that Jeremy Hunt is so fine. And listen, I'm not a sort of militant or a student grant type character. I accept, and I enjoy wealth. But equally, if you are so well upholstered that you forgot you had a bunch of rental flats, which I think Jeremy Hunt did at one point, you are clearly a large part of the problem, which as Chancellor of the Exchequer, you should be dedicating your life's work to solving. Andrew's in Brighton. What would you like to say, Andrew? What made you pick up the phone?
Hi there. I'm a long-term listener, a little bit nervous, so bear with me.
It's only me.
I knew you were going to say that. That always helps. I'm 26, and I also live in Brighton, same as John, your earlier caller. And I'll be echoing a lot of what your previous callers have said. But I've uni a couple of years ago and got a job as a graphic designer, earning just below the average wage. And in a way, I feel quite lucky compared to a lot of my peers because they have not been able to get salary jobs in the fields of interest that they've studied in, etc. So I feel quite lucky in that way, but I'm nowhere near able to save in any significant way towards.
Well, that's the pincer, isn't it? So if rents were low, then the affordability of homes would be less of a problem because you could feel that you were chipping away at your deposit requirements. But if homes are really expensive to buy and rents are really high because they're not controlled in any way, it's a double whammy.
Exactly. It feels like you're one domino away from everything falling apart, because if your landlord decides they want you out for whatever reason, I live in a flat that's too small for the three of us that are in it, but it's just, there's not, the thought of trying to compete for a new flat in Brighton of all places, it's not quite as bad as London, but it is too expensive. Yes. So the chances of me getting enough of a pay increase over the next 5-10 years to even slightly look at living where I work is just off the cards completely. And it's not really been something I've considered since I was an adult.
And that's the big difference between your generation and mine. So 10 years ago, these phone-ins would sound very different because I would be speaking to people who can't quite believe where they found themselves at your age. But you were 18 now, or 16 10 years ago, so you weren't really thinking about it. And if you were thinking about it, you were aware of the economic reality that you would face when you got to the age of 26, 27, 28. So the conversation has moved on from people who've been ambushed by reality to people like you who are essentially straitjacketed by it. What do you think it does? I know you can't compare Andrew in this life to Andrew in the other life, but what do you think it does to your relationship with society, with adulthood even?
I think, adulthood is probably a key word there. It does sort of, the word I used to your producer was infantilization almost, because you can go and visit your parents at Christmas or family friends or your partner's parents, and you're in a house that's have a middle class background. Yes. So when I visit family and friends, you stay in a house that is big enough for you and has enough drawers and cupboards to keep your things in, and you feel, this is comfortable, but you're a visitor.
Yes.
Then you go back to your flat, which is your home, but it does feel like at any minute the situations with renting in Brighton.
I know they're supposed to be addressing no fault evictions, but they said they were addressing bonuses for water company executives about a year ago, and they've announced it again today. So you'll forgive me for being a bit cynical about anything this lot announced. But you're describing. I wonder what the toll is mentally on that. The sort of unmeasured angst, if you like, of that insecurity, that domestic insecurity. You're always a phone call away from having to sling your hook.
It is anxiety-inducing. We've had incorrect noise complaints that we've had to argue against from one specific neighbour, and the first thing our landlord told us was, if this happens again, you're evicted, you're out. And I've lived in this one flat for 4 years, always paid my rent on time, had a really good communication with all the landlords and letting agents and all my neighbours, but because one neighbour made a complaint, it was like all of a sudden my entire
And that,
on the line.
No, and that is the precariousness, even as you fulfil your side of the social contract. In return, you expect a sense of security, some form of security. Andrew, thank you. Alice, I'm going to address you directly because I don't mean you, as all the Brexit voters said to their foreign relatives shortly after the referendum result came in. I love your show, says Alice. Andrew, thank you, mate. Take care. And I've listened to you for years and will keep doing so. Well, I'm glad we've cleared that up. But I'm livid today. You do what so many commentators do, blame private landlords for the ills of the housing crisis. I'm 71 and have invested my life savings in some properties with buy-to-let mortgages that I let out in order to get some income in my old age. I've always put the well-being of any tenant first, and now I have a single mother who can't pay rent and is still there as we're trying to find a solution for her. That is costing me money every month. I could go on and on. Maybe another time, as I can't talk now, but I just wanted to point out that we are not always the culprits for the current crisis. And indeed, she adds that her mortgage payments have doubled and she's only put her rents up by 10%. Alec, not Alice, I beg your pardon. I wasn't talking about you. Obviously, there are some brilliant landlords, but the reality is that a lot of people who we have spoken to today and could continue speaking to for at least another 2 hours are paying mortgages for other people, for people a bit like you, but not you. And no one, I said from the start, it's an easy swing. I don't know why I bother, actually, Alec. I said at the very start, it's an easy swing to blame landlords. And then I took an easy swing at colleagues when I pointed out that some of them sometimes sound like they're running the Landlord Benevolent Fund. The kind of people who get their violins out when people say they can't afford school fees but deny the reality of the necessity for food banks, for example. It's one of my favourites. Food banks, load of rubbish. Just need to work harder. Hygiene poverty. People can't afford shampoo. It's 12 pence in my local Poundland. Well, you can't afford to pay school fees if they put VAT on them. Oh, my God, come here. I'll tickle your tummy for you. Poor thing. Let me mop your fevered brow. So those kind of characters, they can't get enough of you landlords. And I know that lots of you are lovely, but the reality is that there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who can afford to buy a house, just not for themselves under the current system. So I'm glad we've cleared that up, Alec. Adam's in Bracknell. Adam, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi there, James. I just wanted to give you a call to highlight my current situation. So I'm 42. I've been private renting for 20 years. I did some calculations recently. I've paid over $200,000 in rent in 20 years. That's mad, right?
That's the same as Wayne in Basildon, who's a mate of mine off air, who's just been tweeting me about it. Exactly the same age, exactly the same sum of money. That must sort of stop you in your tracks a bit.
Not only that, it's escalating. So over the next 20 years, that will probably increase by another 15%.
Yeah.
So I've just looked at my figures, and me and my girlfriend have decided that we can't afford. So she lives with her mum, and I private rent on my own in a small one-bed flat.
Right.
What we've decided to do, and a growing number of people are doing this, and I know several people already that are, is we're going to convert a van and live in a van. Because we can't afford a home in England. Forget about buying. We can't afford to rent in England.
And you both work?
Yeah, we both work. I'm not in a great salary, but I work full time. After my rent and bills, I'm left with less than £200 to live off for the month.
It's unsustainable, isn't it? And clearly it is unsustainable for you, literally unsustainable.
It
This is van life, isn't it? I've been reading a bit about van life. It's not an ideal choice, is it? But it's been thrust upon you, really.
Well, we've decided we won't be able to have children, so no family. The people that I do know that are currently living in their vans say, and I'm sure I'm going to feel like this once I've completed my transition into a van from this flat, is you feel like a second-class citizen. You get moved on. If you park somewhere overnight, you'll be moved on and told to get dirty looks from people. So not only can you not afford to live anymore, but you're now starting to feel like you're not even a part of the society, and it will lead to depression, mental health problems, suicide. So the impact of the rental market has such a domino effect I don't think people realise.
No, I think you're right, and I don't know what turning this oil tanker around will look like, but some form of legislative intervention is clearly necessary. It may be too late for you, Adam. Good luck, mate. Seriously, I mean that's not just a breach of the social contract, as you say. It's almost the complete abandonment of it. And you are keeping your end of the bargain. Listen, I don't mind if people are out of work, but I think in terms of the model of how society operates, if you've got two incomes and you're thinking and you feel that you have little choice but to move into a van, then something is very rotten in the state of Brexit Britain, isn't it? It is just gone 11 o'clock. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A little later in the programme, we'll return to the question of online scams from a completely different perspective, because I very, 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 very nearly fell victim to one a couple of months ago. But up next, the NHS and what percentage of people are foreign in it? 3 minutes after 11. A lot of you, understandably, concerned, heartbroken by what is currently happening on the Gaza Strip, where I mean the last place to which millions of Palestinian people have been told to move is now under heavy bombardment, with people killed overnight. There was a particularly horrible story, I don't know if you saw it, about a little girl in a car that phoned the authorities, a little 6-year-old girl who phoned the authorities from the car in which her relatives had been killed. In fact, they found a sort of burnt-out husk of an ambulance nearby when they finally got to the car, and by then it was too late. She died there as well. So I don't know. We may take a hit on it, but I don't know what to say. I can't just sit here and describe it for an hour. I can't point out the disappearance of international support for what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing. I certainly can't prioritise this pillock in Rochdale who's been secretly recorded saying stupid things over the actual killing of human beings in Gaza. So there'll be none of that on this programme. But I don't know what to say. Hit by heavy bombardment overnight. Where are these people supposed to go? I think they're supposed to move back to the areas that have already been bombed. Are they? And sort of live in holes or live under canvas. David Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, Joe Biden, the calls upon Benjamin Netanyahu not to do it were almost unanimous. But as I said to you last week, I mean, way, way, way behind the concern for the dead and the dying, the vulnerable and the targeted, that death toll now at 28,340. I worry what he's done to Israel. And it's standing in the world with future generations and with current generations. And some of the friends, some of the people who have been loudest in their support for what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing, they're no friends to the Jewish people or the Israeli people. They're largely just rancid Islamophobes. You should have seen that coming, I think. I really do. But at least 67 killed, according to the Gaza Health Ministry, in the latest Israeli attack. And of course, as anyone who's ever dealt with war zones will tell you, these numbers are almost certainly going to increase exponentially when agencies can actually get in to start going through the destruction, going through the rubble. 6 minutes after 11. So I'm categorically not ignoring this story. I'd hate you to think that I was. You know that I wouldn't, I think. We've been knocking about together for long enough now, but the Israeli PM insists that civilians will be able to leave Rafah even as the bombardment unfolded overnight. There's a sort of almost Orwellian air now to some of the contributions to public discourse from Benjamin Netanyahu. Rafah's been hit by heavy bombardment overnight. People there already living in tents, and the I don't know the horror of what's going to happen next, seemingly ignored by Western politicians who were far too quick to offer full-throated support in the first instance. 11:07 is the time, so we will keep an eye on that story, and I will bring you reports as and when they appear. But you're looking at warnings of catastrophic consequences, famine, and the rest of it. And I don't know. So I don't know what to say. There you go. That's me being honest with you. 7 minutes after 11 is the time. Call it what it is, James. It's an ethnic cleansing. I've been calling it an ethnic cleansing for weeks. I can't see any other phrase to describe it. I just can't. That's pretty much what Benjamin Netanyahu said he wanted to achieve when he was a young man, giving an interview to Max Hastings, who went on to be editor of the Daily Telegraph and was writing a biography of Netanyahu's brother. So I don't know. Is the short answer to that question. 8 minutes after 11 is the time. We'll talk about something rather closer to home, but particularly pertinent, I think, to the current climate. This is, and you just heard it in Thomas's news bulletin, nearly a third of nurses and more than a third of doctors in the NHS are from overseas. Of all the... and yes, of course I want a ceasefire, and I want a ceasefire now, as I think do some of the politicians that have been a little bit late in arriving at that conclusion. But the only politicians who matter are the ones that are in power. The ones that are in power. I remember the Brexit debate probably a little bit more clearly than some people do, because I was neck deep in it. But I really only became James O. Brexit afterwards, when I felt that nobody was really holding the promises to account. Do you remember? I mean, it was actually extraordinary. I think that Robbie Gibb, who would shortly go and work for Theresa May at Downing Street before coming back to the BBC as an executive board member, I think that he sent out an instruction that Brexit was over and done with, so it had ceased to be newsworthy. I think it was him. Forgive me if I'm wrong. It ceased to be newsworthy, as it were, because it was over and done with. And I remember thinking at the time, hang on a minute, that's good news for the liars, isn't it? If I'd promised you your food would be cheaper, or that immigration was going to come crashing down if you had been successfully persuaded that that was something that you wanted, the idea that the BBC, of all places, was going to stop actually reporting on the reality of Brexit while all of the print media would still be cheerleading and lying about it up until the point, I predicted this almost to the letter, cheerleading and lying about Brexit up until the point where it started claiming that there was a good Brexit, but it goes to a different school. I forget precisely when the pivot was, but I told you it would happen, and it happened. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. Shut up, Ramonas. Drink those Remainer tears. Oh, it's so good. I'm so happy. It's the best thing we've ever done. Suck on that lovely sovereignty. It's delicious. And then suddenly it was, oh no, it's all gone horribly wrong, but it's not our fault. It's all the fault of other people, probably Remainers. The reason why Brexit is rubbish is all the fault of the people who explained in forensic detail why it was going to be rubbish. So that happened, right? But one of the things that I found most upsetting is the word that I'd use, because I heard these words coming from the mouths of people that I had once considered friends, possibly, certainly colleagues. Why can't we train our own? I never understood that. Why can't we train our own? Whether you were talking about lorry drivers or consultant surgeons. Why can't we train our own? There's one person in particular who used to say that all the time. They used to work here. And I used to think, well, what happens when you go to a hospital or when you go to the doctors and it's somebody who wasn't born here looking after your kids? Do you actually have a sense of resentment? Do you sit there thinking, oh, I wish you were British? I just couldn't quite conceive of that level of bigotry. I know how naive I sound. Why can't we train our own? And yet, oddly, that is a question that I am interested in the answer to as I look at the figures today. So for the avoidance of doubt, I am just grateful. The only word I have to describe my attitude to the third of nurses and over a third of doctors in the NHS who are from overseas, the only words I have for you are thank you. Thank God you're here. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and thank you again. And I can only imagine why or how you feel when you turn on your radio or your television to hear somebody saying, why can't we train our own? It's such a vile position to adopt in the context of that's why we need to leave the European Union, to be saying we need to leave the European Union because there are too many French paediatricians. There are too many Polish nurses. And that question, why can't we train our own, became very loud, didn't it? People like Farage, predictably enough, and the rest of them banging on about it all the time. But there is actually a mystery here for me, because being a doctor, certainly being a doctor, is or was a very desirable job. Quite a lot of my mates from school became doctors. From both of my schools. It was one of the lovely things about Facebook is re-establishing contact with people that you haven't heard from for years. And I mention that because I want to highlight the desirability of the job itself. You know, these are well-educated, privately educated men who wanted to be doctors from pretty much the moment that they selected their A-levels. And against that backdrop of being a doctor, I mean, you can still, in some towns, you can tell where the doctor lived. My house is a doctor's old house. These were the sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? They were the prestige properties in a town where the doctor, you're the local doctor. And yet, such is the current state of the system that we have to beg, borrow and steal doctors and nurses from other countries. And I just don't know why. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. So I just want to know why. Why has becoming a doctor or a nurse lost its appeal for British-born people? And I stress again, this conversation is being conducted from a position of abject gratitude to the people who come here from overseas to work in the NHS. But I am intrigued by the question of why the job has become so much less attractive over the last 30 or 40 years compared to... Some of the answers will be obvious, some hopefully less so. But what has happened? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And as a side order, this question is inspired by Colin, who's been in touch to say, my work colleague a few years back said the reason I voted for Brexit was because when I was lying in hospital being treated, all of the staff were foreign. His then severe cancer is now in remission thanks to the care he received. So as a side order, what happens when your racist relative goes to hospital and discovers the absolute essential nature of high levels of immigration? What actually happens? Do they come out like Coles, mate, complaining about the people that are literally keeping them alive? Or do they have some sort of change in their attitude to immigration in general? Or do they sign up for that wonderful post-Brexit refrain that we heard on the programme, Count, I didn't mean you, because Colin's mate really did mean you. It was a French doctor, wasn't it? Do you remember? A female French doctor, the first day after the referendum result came in, who rang us in tears. She'd already endured some abuse, I think, from patients. I think she was a psychiatrist, if memory serves. And she'd already decided to leave the country. It's one of those very early calls that made me see some of the writing that was on the wall. But why? Why is it not an attractive job for British people anymore? Or why is it a hard job to get into? Doctors in particular, but nurses as well. And the second question is, what happens when your racist relative goes to hospital and discovers just how important high levels of immigration in this country are to keeping the NHS afloat? That is a third of doctors and nurses, 1/3 of doctors and nurses, 33.3 recurring percent who are routinely and regularly demonised, maligned and insulted by some of the loudest voices in British politics and British media. It's extraordinary, isn't it? Absolutely extraordinary. But what is the reason behind it? Why do we need so many NHS workers, so many doctors and nurses from overseas. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And a genuine, inspired by Colin's mate here, a genuine question of what happens when somebody who is maybe not racist, okay, let's be a bit kinder, someone who is persuaded that immigration is a massive problem, what happens when they go to hospital? 0345 6060 973. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. And of course, what's it like if you are a doctor or a nurse and you are from overseas? Can you tell when you've got a patient like Colin's mate, someone who's got a problem with the fact that you're foreign? Can you? I mean, sometimes, presumably, people are just racist to your face. But can you tell? What's that like to be dedicated to providing people with healthcare who have got a problem with you because you weren't born here? God, we've created some problems, haven't we, in this country by letting liars and charlatans get their sticky little fingers on our steering wheels. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Here we go. Aids in Telford. He's a bit thick. Have you visited a local hospital or doctor's surgery lately? The argument that immigration is keeping our NSH running is false. My local doctor's surgery was completely full with immigrant patients last Thursday. I suppose you don't see this due to using private doctors and hospitals. I don't know where to start with that, Aid, but we're talking about a third of staff in the NHS, not the NSH, mate, the NHS being from overseas. So what you need to ask yourself is what would happen if they weren't there? And I mean, if it's so important to you, I don't have private doctors or private hospitals. Perhaps I should, because that way I wouldn't bump into scumbags like you when I pop into my local GP surgery. So I suppose you should be on commission, possibly. Don't use the NHS because you might bump into racists like Aid. There you go. That would be quite a good slogan. And then, of course, it would free up places for other people as well to get the appointment that I currently have as a proud and grateful user of the NHS. 22 after 11 is the time. Emma is in Ashfield. Emma, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
This actually happened over Christmas to a family member of mine. My Brexit voting uncle unfortunately got leukemia just before Christmas, and so spent a lot of time. And when I went to visit him, he said it's really opened his eyes to immigration and the NHS, and he's done a 180.
Really?
He wants to get the Tories out after the election. He said he had so much fun chatting to them all about the nationalities and how they celebrate Christmas traditionally, and it was...
So just literally clocking, because, I mean, quite if you're dealing with doctors and nurses from a patient's point of view, it becomes clear, I'd have thought, quite quickly if people are from overseas. And it's so just curiosity and human interest broke down barriers that had been put up by years of, presumably, political and media brainwashing.
Absolutely. I mean, we've had many discussions with different politically.
But where you failed, these doctors and nurses succeeded.
And young doctors and nurses as well. They're all, when I went to visit them, they're all younger foreign nurses and doctors, and it really enjoyed spending time and chatting with them.
I only asked that question as an afterthought, but what a fascinating insight. And how is he? Is his leukemia under control? Is he?
Oh, yeah, absolutely brilliant. Honestly, he was literally diagnosed on the Tuesday morning, and he was receiving treatment Tuesday afternoon in hospital.
And listen, NHS has got a whole heap of problems at the moment, largely as a consequence of very deliberate political policies pursued over the last 14 years. But the minute we lose our sense of gratitude towards the people who are keeping it afloat wherever they come from, because, of course, 2/3 will be British-born, but a third aren't, I can see. I mean, I don't know what the alternative would be for Emma's uncle. Be Colin's mate. Goes to hospital with cancer and decides he's going to vote Brexit because so many of the doctors are foreign. It's just extraordinary to me. But there we go. 24 after 11. Thank you, Emma. Christopher's in Walthamstow. Christopher, what would you like to say?
Yeah, so I've been working as a healthcare assistant now for 10 years, and I've just started my training as a student nurse associate, and I can tell you succinctly why no one's joining the NHS.
Go on.
Well, if you start training as a nurse associate, the first thing they told us in university was, no, you can't join any sports teams, and you need to be at the beck and call of the hospital whenever they need you for placement.
Right.
Then they turned around and said the 5,000 grand learning support fund you're not entitled to because nurse associates are not on the list.
Yes.
And you can put that in for another couple of other professions, but the Tories, they keep leaving that out when they talk about that.
This is the bursary, as it was.
Yes. I think they called it the learning support fund now, but yes, okay. That 5,000 is, but it's not for. There's a few professions in the NHS that are not applicable. We're one of them.
Right.
And then you get when you actually get onto the board.
Take your time, mate. Seriously, you've got all the time in the world. I want to hear about what's going on in your world. Don't be nervous and don't just take your time. Seriously.
Awesome. So when you get onto the ward, you'll often find yourself short-staffed, even with the large numbers of foreign staff that we've taken on recently. They won't take on agency rates because they haven't got the budget. They're often running, I think our trust, we was running a 70% overspend on agency staff.
Holy moly.
It wasn't the foreign patients. So, as union reps, we often have to ask, can we afford to pay our staff? Oh, yes, we can. When you get
the job is
short staff.
The job is close to unbearable then for you because you mean.
Yeah, exactly.
Why are you still there?
Fully staffed,
why are you still there?
It just fits in with the training at the moment. I'm going to be honest. When I complete my degree, my plan is to go to Australia or America.
And that is a common. And tell me a little bit about the people that have come here that you work with from overseas, because they are.
Yes.
They're putting up with conditions that you're describing as close to unbearable.
Oh, they are. So not unfortunately. I mean, our staff are great, but they come over from the Philippines and India.
Yes.
I don't know about India, but I can tell you the average wage in the Philippines is about $250 US per month.
It is. You pick on the two most common non-UK nationalities, actually. Indian doctors and nurses account for 10.1% of all nurses and health visitors, followed by Filipinos at 7.7%. So those are the two nationalities, actually.
Yes, but those are most of the nationalities I see at our trust as well. So, but like I say, they're great. They've got good clinical knowledge. It's all well and good.
Yes.
But we tell them that you're going to earn 5 to 6 times higher than what you're currently earning.
Right.
We don't tell them the small little details like the average rent in London.
Yeah, and the cost of living. So you come here a little bit hypnotised by the figure on the job offer without having a full and clear. So how disillusioned do people get, and how quickly?
Oh, very quickly.
And they talk to you about it. They say, how am I supposed to survive? How can I look after my family? If they're allowed to have their family here, of course. Some of them aren't.
Well, yes, exactly. And with the Filipino nurses, again, they actually set the US syllabus.
Right.
So when they get their visas over here, it doesn't take long if they haven't got family commitments or, if they
before they hit the road as well.
Before they get their state licenses, whatever state they want, because they've set the US exams, they've already set NCLEX, they've got all the hours we haven't got.
So do we know what the turnover is like? Just anecdotally on your ward, in your hospital, do we know what the turnover of staff is like, even as people come here from elsewhere before they head off somewhere else?
It was a major problem, because I'm also a union rep, it was a major problem with the board. So
really?
Something that,
Churn. Because that's the mystery for me. I mean, you've answered some of the problems, but the mystery would be, why are people putting up with a situation or with conditions that British-born people are being turned off by? And you'll struggle to find anyone explaining this as articulately as Christopher. But there it is, and then you're left with that thing that, you resist it for a while because it seems a little bit lazy, or at least very, very straightforward, too simplistic perhaps, to think that this is being deliberately done. But the science writer Marcus Chown has tweeted me this morning simply saying you're more likely to be treated by an immigrant in our NHS than you are to be behind one in a queue. The reason there are 7.6 million people on waiting lists and people are being treated on trolleys and in corridors and you can't see a GP is because the Tories have deliberately run down your NHS. And I find it now impossible to resist that conclusion. And of course, I don't know whether they're appealing to our friend in Telford, who thinks that everybody who criticises the Tories over their treatment of the NHS must be doing so from a private hospital ward. I don't know how that works intellectually. But you know that they're betting on or banking on people having a problem with apparently foreign faces in the waiting room, even as they have to rely upon apparently foreign faces in the treatment room, which just shows how mad everything is, which is where the other question this hour comes in, is what happens when you're anti-immigration, let's just say, rather than racist. Your anti-immigration relative goes to hospital and realises that without high levels of immigration, they probably wouldn't be operating at all. 11:30 is the time. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 34 minutes after 11 is the time. It was one of the grimmest elements, for me at least, on a personal level of the Brexit conversation. Is that why can't we train our own? Because the message that sends to foreign doctors and nurses is that you are a kind of inferior option, whereas I've never met anyone. Well, it's not true, of course. I do it in the job, don't I? But I can't quite get my head around anyone turning up at the hospital and being cross about the country of origin of the person treating them, if the quality of the treatment is high and good. But there is a question about why British-born people aren't going into the NHS in anything like the numbers that they used to. Tracy in Coventry knits it to the conversation we had in the last hour when she writes, it's probably a massive generalisation, James. But if public sector jobs are hugely difficult as well as underpaid, as they often are nowadays, what is the attraction to these public sector jobs for people already resident in the UK? Add in pension erosion, the lack of ability to buy a home, and ask yourself who wants or can afford to be a nurse or a teacher. And putting key workers in the same category. Conversation in the last hour about not being able to buy a home. So if Christopher is correct, and I've got no reason to doubt him, you are tempting people here from countries like India and the Philippines because on paper the wage looks enormous. And if you are sending it all home, then it will have a measurable difference upon your family back there. But when you factor in the cost of living here, there's probably not a great deal to send home. So I think the next bit of research I'd be keen to see would be the churn level. The people tempted here on these special visas, the exemptions that had to be brought in to replace freedom of movement, who then actually get a flavour of the terms and conditions in the NHS and find themselves thinking, yeah, maybe not after all. 11:35 is the time. Sarah's in Battle. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Sarah.
I'm a doctor of 20 years. I've been a GP partner full-time for 16 years.
Right.
However, I'm no longer practicing. August 2022, I suddenly snapped and broke and walked out of my clinic and never walked back.
Really?
Yeah.
What, actually, literally you did that. You just said, that's it, yes. I can't do this. Crikey, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. It was a bit of a shock to me too, but sure. When you work 60 hours a week and you give absolutely everything, but you feel like you're achieving nothing, when you feel worthless and you feel that you can't do your job properly and safely and look after the patients in the way that you were trained to do, I think, and I know I'm not the only doctor or nurse who out there who feels that, but I became so overwhelmed by the sheer amount of work that was always in front of me, and felt like I was going round in circles and giving and getting nothing back, and realising that my sacrifices were pointless. I'd missed so many Christmases, school plays, parents' evenings, tucking my children into bed, and I suddenly was wondering what it was all for.
Well, what was it for? What does forgive me, what does getting something back look like? What was missing? Do you mean the gratitude of patients, or do you mean the recognition from above, as it were? I don't mean God. I mean like the government or something.
Well, yes. Unfortunately, it was from all sectors: media, politicians, patients, other colleagues in other parts of medicine. Right. Especially general practice, I think, has received an awful lot of slack, especially through COVID. The negative media that we received during that time. Some
people, to avoid burnout, some people will be going part-time, and then they can turn their radio on in the morning and get a kicking for that as well, can't they?
Well, this is, again, the misunderstanding of what a part-time GP is actually working. Part-time GPs probably work 30, 40 hours. Just by the kind of that our days tend to be 12, 14-hour days.
Yes.
I think the problem in this country is there's a fundamental misunderstanding of actually what the doctor's job entails, especially GPs, the risk, the responsibility, especially GP partners, the way that we actually are running effectively a business as well, having to keep that afloat. A GP partner are independent contractors. We have unlimited liability. When there are pay rises, that is literally coming out of our pockets. So financially at the moment, general practice is almost unviable.
Right.
And many practices are closing, which is obviously, as a lot of us, creates guilt because we are now putting extra work on our other colleagues because they then have to mop up the excess patients. I mean, when I left my practice, I had 3,000 patients registered under me personally. And that's,
What would be the optimal number, do you think, if that's not a silly question?
Optimal number is about 1,500 to 1,800 per GP. A full-time GP. So we have a stark shortage. We're probably 5,000, 6,000 GPs short in this country.
And that problem's going to get bigger because the reality you describe is unbearable.
That they are training more GPs, and in fact there are more GPs trained, but they're not staying because they can see what we're facing. And
so some will go. Some will hang up their stethoscope, like you have done, I sense, permanently, and others will head abroad.
Yes.
No chance of you going back in the current climate, I don't think.
I'm finding ways to. I'm currently working on a rough sleeping initiative in my county, and may be working as the doctor for that. That's under discussion. For me to find a way to use my skills in a different. Setting, but I'm not keen. I would be scared to go back into the level I was working before, because I would just be angry the whole time.
I'm sorry to hear that, but not surprised from the way you've described it. What and I think you've answered the question in part, but why? I mean, this would filter down then to trainees. They'd very quickly realise they don't want to be doing this. Because I'm looking at why we rely so heavily upon foreign-born doctors and nurses.
And they bring a great perspective and great skill set to the country. And again, I think people don't realise that we very much value our foreign colleagues, because they bring a whole different perspective to things and very much enrich our workforce, and they are to be applauded. But
they're not. I mean, this is what Christopher's call was so interesting for, wasn't it? Is that they're going to be pretty disillusioned pretty quickly as well, especially if they've been lured here under false pretense. Peter in Finchley says, I've been speaking to 2 Indian nurses who came here on the promise of sky-high wages, but very quickly regretted their decision due to sky-high rent payments.
I think, it's the same for all the public sector workers, and why the junior doctors who are being considered, again, being maligned, they are vehemently, they really, really care about the profession and want to do the right thing. But a person has to be recognised for their worth. They have to be, you have to recognise the risk and responsibility.
Yes.
And I think that, and the training and the finances that goes behind our training and the length of our training. And it is, you have to, and this applies to anyone in the public sector, you have to be paid your worth. And the goodwill runs out if that worth and value is not recognised. And it is an investment. And I think currently policies are very short-sighted and a false economy.
Well, and you remind me of that Oscar Wilde, I think it was Oscar Wilde line about knowing the cost of everything and the value of nothing. Because you know, the model as it is, you pay people as little as you can get away with, which seems to have infested the NHS, whereas in fact the social value of what you do should translate into financial value. But it was interesting that you spoke, Sarah, at least as much about a sense of ingratitude, or you actually used the word worthless, because they're not financial. So it's only part of the picture, isn't it, the pay? The other part of it is the value that society places on people like you. Has she gone? Have we lost her? No, probably. No, you're here. Sorry, what happened then?
Yeah, sorry. I don't know.
No, all right.
The reception in my area is very good. I think the respect for the profession has very much died. I spent most of my time trying not to tell people that I was a doctor when I'd be asked what I did.
It's the Daily Mail again. It's the Daily Mail and the Murdoch press, and the sense that you're all swinging the lead, or you're all living in Barbados, or you're all phoning it in, or you're all taking time off and taking the mickey. And then, of course, if you dare to take industrial action, as the junior doctors have done, the kickings increase exponentially. And listen, there's no earthly way that it doesn't translate into behaviour in the surgery. You turn your radio on or you open your newspaper and someone is speaking contemptuously about doctors or teachers, then like night following day, the teacher will be disrespected in the classroom by children, but mostly, of course, outside the classroom by parents, and the doctor will be disrespected in the surgery by patients. It is so obviously true that one wonders quite what the kind of people who routinely engage in the demonisation of doctors, in this case, or teachers in others, wonders what passes for brains between their ears sometimes. Sarah, thank you. What a sad story. I got that image of you almost like Michael Douglas in that film where you're just not going to take it. I'm just going, that's it, I'm out. I'm walking out the door. But I'm glad you did, because goodness knows what would have happened to you if you'd stayed in that unbearable environment. It's 11:45. It's 11:48. My partner and I, I'm reading this. It'd be a bit of a shock to your system if it was actually me speak. My partner and I both trained as doctors. We're both British born, and then we left after we qualified. We don't work in the NHS. Decision was huge and heartbreaking, but it felt like the only one we could take. In all honesty, I'll never forgive the Tories for taking away my lifelong dream to work as a doctor. And you're right, Rob. That film I was thinking of was Falling Down, starring Michael Douglas. In a moment, Henry Riley will join us with an interesting story about the amount of public sector contracts, or the amount of government contracts that are going to a company of particular interest, given the identity of its owners. I wonder if you can you solve that riddle yet? Can you imagine what the company is? Well, I don't want to spoil the surprise. Henry will be gutted. We'll do that shortly. First, though, Jodie is in Manchester. Is that you? Did I just read your text?
Yes.
That's a spooky coincidence.
Hi.
I just saw your name. So you signed your text Joe, and yet since you sent the text, you rang in.
Yes.
Fantastic.
So I text, and then I'm a first-time caller. I've never called before, but this is something that I feel really passionate about.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
So thank you for having me.
On some shows, they phone the texters because the phones don't ring. But I just want to make it absolutely clear that doesn't happen on this show. So I just got a bit thrown by the fact that you called in after you texted. Carry on, Jodie.
Yes, so as I say in the text, both my partner and I trained at medical school. We've done the 5-year degree. And then completing that, both decided that working in the NHS just wasn't really a viable option for us.
Why? What? I mean, give me the sort of highlights of that decision, as it were.
So kind of over the last probably year and a half of medical school, we started to feel that actually this might not be the career that we thought it was.
Yeah.
The treatment of doctors is just so poor in the NHS at the moment, and the whole situation just became so difficult to be around. You know, we had doctors constantly telling us, "Why are you doing this? Run while you can. It's too late for me, but you can still get out."
I do that with journalists, actually.
Yeah,
but it's a bit more serious when doctors are doing it to the next generation of doctors.
Yeah, I think that was really difficult. And obviously in medical school, you're trained to such a high standard to give this fantastic level of care, but due to resources and staffing and
so you wouldn't be able to do the job that you wanted to do, even if you took the job that you wanted to take.
That was absolutely, that was how it felt, and it felt like you're having to give subpar care. And obviously I've only trained in one trust. I can't speak for the entire of the UK, but certainly doctors were not treated well, not well respected. We put in our applications for our rotations, and there was no guarantee that my partner and myself were getting married this year would even be able to live in the same city. Looking at the wage, we didn't think we'd be able to really afford rent on our own. So, would we have to move back in with our parents?
So back to the social contract that we spoke about in the last hour. Can I ask what you're doing instead, or would that be nosy of me?
You can ask. So I'm now working in a company. I work more on a research side of things.
Okay.
So still kind of within the medical the medical world, but not as a doctor.
No. And that is probably, that's it then. You can't see yourself going back into the NHS.
I don't think so. I mean, we could do. There are ways you can get into it years later, but I can't see myself doing it. I don't think my mental health would have survived.
Well, do you know, I think the big lesson of this hour, well, there's several actually, but one of them in particular will be that notion of burnout. Listening to Sarah describe literally downing tools and walking out of the surgery in the middle of the day, and the mental health, the toll it takes to be undervalued and overworked. And these are not jobs where being undervalued and overworked can be easily accommodated. So I think when we read about doctors or hear about doctors working, quotes, part-time, end quotes, which will be 30 to 40 hours a week as opposed to 50 to 60, we'd all do well to be a little bit more sympathetic, I think. Jodie, thank you. It is 11:53. Denise in Ashford in Middlesex, straight into Idiot's Corner for Denise. Let's hope that trainee doctor couple paid back the taxes used to train them. I don't know if you're aware of how much debt students go into these days, Denise, but I just stay away from scissors, for the rest of today. Henry Riley is here with an exclusive scoop.
Well, yes, thank you, James. Very good morning. So this is regarding, to solve your riddle from earlier on, this is regarding Infosys, the Indian tech giant.
I know that name. Where does that ring a bell?
Well, so Rishi Sunak's wife, Akshata Murthy, has a share in that particular company.
Her dad's company?
Her dad founded it in 1981, yes.
Right, yes.
And she has a 0.91% share, which, as I'll come on to later, is not as small as it seems. It's still pretty lucrative.
Right.
But we can reveal that Infosys received a near 50% increase in public sector invoices in 2023. That was Rishi Sunak's first full year as Prime Minister. In fact, it was the best ever year for the firm in the public sector. So public sector invoices essentially are sort of one-off work. It's a more accurate measure than contracts because the money's paid up front.
Oh, yes,
whereas
okay.
with contracts, as you know, James, they can go on over a few years. They're not just, it's not committed funds, it's funds that are actually being paid. And we've been working with Tussle, the data provider, who analyse a lot of these figures. And it shows that Infosys were paid £7 million in public sector invoices last year. For context, that's up from £4.7 million in 2022. So in total, it was just over £7 million. It includes over £250,000 from the Government Property Agency, a similar amount from the Care Quality Commission, and the London Borough of Brent, for example, spent £2 million in invoices with Infosys. Sums being spent mostly on consultant fees and information communication technology. What is also interesting is, in addition to many of these wins, the company's also won spots on a number of frameworks in recent years. Now, that doesn't give you a guarantee of work, but as Tussle point out, it can give you the edge in winning contracts in the future. So two of those, James, for example, there's the NHS Shared Business Services £250 million intelligence automation framework.
Oh, yes.
Infosys were one of 28 companies to gain a spot on that. They also won a spot on a £563 million contract from the FCA. That is a Digital Services Framework Agreement. Infosys was one of the companies appointed last year to that particular board. Speaking with me earlier, Labour's Jonathan Ashworth said that taxpayers deserve answers.
Taxpayers will want to have serious questions answered as to how this firm, with its close links to Rishi Sunak directly, appears to be cashing in. It's high time we had a full explanation as to all the circumstances as to how this firm has been awarded these lucrative contracts. This is about taxpayers' money, and when we've seen a government throw taxpayers' money down the drain, it's right that taxpayers are demanding answers.
Oh, you can demand answers, and indeed we do, but it doesn't necessarily mean that this is bad value for money for the taxpayer. The other problem is that some of that money will make its way into the Prime Minister's wife's bank account.
Yes, and look, I think the issue is, James, you're right, there's no sense of impropriety here, or no sort of, certainly from these figures. However, it is that close link with Akshata Murthy and that constant talk that with regards to Rishi Sunak's involvement. So, I mean, just to give you some examples, James, between 2012 and 2020, 2023, Infosys has been awarded government contracts worth over £100 million. Now, Akshatamurti's share of 0.91% was valued at around £481 million in 2023. So it's a significant...
How much?
£483 million.
Gosh.
In 2023. She received dividends of £13 million in the last financial year as well. As we referenced, her father co-founded it in 1981. Important to point out, the Cabinet Office have responded to our story. They've said all contracts are awarded following an open and fair process, and decisions are rigorously scrutinised. Ministers do not take part in the evaluation or selection of winning bidders. They also point out that ministers do declare interests and that there are steps taken to ensure there are no conflicts of interest. But certainly eyebrows being raised by the Labour Party.
Yes, an interesting story, actually. And you'd have thought there'd be some sort of requirement not to have any family interests profiting from public contracts, from public sector contracts. I don't think that's unreasonable. We could be missing something, I suppose, but it doesn't seem unreasonable to me to just say, well, I'll park my shareholding for the duration of your premiership, or you know, not bid for government contracts while you're Prime Minister.
Well, and as you pointed out, James, there's no sense of sleaze here. However, given that Rishi Sunak did make clear that he wanted to distance himself from the previous sleaze, I think there's certainly an argument to be made of recusing yourself from that, well, working with that particular company in the public sector.
Yes, thank you, Henry. Henry Riley there with a little exclusive from his own digging. There you go. John in Norwich. You'll like this, Henry. Henry Riley is the best addition to your show since Mystery Hour.
Wow, goodness me.
That's John. How about that, eh? Let me see your phone. Have you been sending messages?
I was going to say,
84850 pretending to be John in Norwich.
He's paid about as much as the government pay Infosys from my bank account.
That's lovely. And I agree, actually. Well, maybe I wouldn't go that far, but it was certainly an augmentation to the overall entertainment. That's it, I think, for this hour. Thank you, Henry Riley. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I haven't got to the bottom of that question of the what happens. I thought Emma's call up first this hour with the Brexit voting uncle goes into hospital with leukemia and completely changes his politics overnight when he realises how heavily the NHS relies upon foreign workers, relies upon overseas-born doctors and nurses. But the question of why more people who were born here don't want to go into it has been comprehensively answered. It's coming up to 12. I like this story about scams and frauds because I now know how easy it is to be ripped off online, because it so nearly happened to... Well, I'll tell you, it so nearly happened to me. It is 3 minutes after 12 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We've got quite a lot to get through this hour, so because I want to bring you up to date with what is going on in Gaza. David Cameron there sounding stronger than he has thus far with regard to Benjamin Netanyahu's, increasingly obvious determination to inflict continuing humanitarian catastrophe upon the Palestinian people. I saw the diplomatic correspondent of the Washington Post a few hours ago reporting that Joe Biden was edging ever closer to a breach with Netanyahu, who in his words is no longer seen as a productive partner who can be influenced in private. And this Labour candidate in Rochdale focusing attention once again on the question of anti-Semitism and why it is an accusation levelled at anybody who ever criticises Israel. You need to be clear about what is and what is not based upon the ethnicity or religion of the person that you're criticising. So when I condemn Benjamin Netanyahu for what he is doing in Gaza, I would be doing so if he was a Hindu, a Muslim, a Jew, a Christian, a Zoroastrian, a Scientologist, a Buddhist, or even a Pastafarian. And I'm absolutely 100% clear about that. I don't know whether this candidate in Rochdale would have suggested that the Israeli government had some form of complicity in the terror attack by Hamas on October the 7th. I don't know if he would have made those comments if Benjamin Netanyahu had been a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian, a Catholic, a Protestant, a Methodist, a Baptist, an evangelical, a Hare Krishna, a Zoroastrian, a Scientologist. I don't know. Only he knows that. Unless you do know that he definitely wouldn't have made such comments unless... except about a Jewish man, then you can't really, I don't think, accuse him of anti-Semitism any more than you can accuse one of the most reliably bonkers columnists in the Daily Telegraph, a chap called Tim Stanley, is it, who writes today that many people in Israel, many voters in Israel believe that Netanyahu is to blame for the security lapses that led to October the 7th, adding, though they are united in abhorrence of Hamas, nowhere in the ethical debate about what to do is more intense than in Israel itself, something that an awful lot of commentators in the right of the UK media seem to completely miss. So I want to catch up with the situation there, and I also want to speak to Fergal Sharkey about the proposals, and I'll tell you why I want to check in with Fergal. These proposals to clamp down on bonuses being paid to water company bosses who are pumping shocking amounts of sewage into our waterways. I've just got a sense of deja vu, and I want to check with Fergal that I'm not going mad on that. So there's a lot to get through this hour, which is why I would urge you to ring in sooner than rather than later on the next subject that I'm about to share with you. I like this national campaign against fraud. People need help protecting themselves. Now, I don't know whether you think this is arrogant of me, or whether you think this is unfair of me, or whether I'm actually describing the situation that you are currently in. But I didn't used to have that much sympathy for people who'd been ripped off, on the grounds that if something's too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. Or how hard can it really be to understand that your bank is never going to phone you up and urge you to transfer all your funds into the account of a mysterious Middle Eastern potentate or whatever it may be. So I was not unsympathetic, but I was certainly a little sceptical about how big a problem it was for the broader population. And then I started learning about the lengths that these people go to and the tricks and the technology that they deploy. And you realise that, as with quite a lot of crime, if they put the same levels of effort and creativity into lawful pursuits, they could be millionaires by the end of the month. But the real clincher for me was for coming perilously close to being scammed myself in the most ridiculous of circumstances. So what I want you to tell me about, ideally, are scams that other people might not know about. All right? So some of them are fairly well established and fairly well known, but ones that other people might not know about. And don't be shy, because I'm going to tell you what happened to me, and there'll be someone listening going, I can't believe James thinks that is I can't believe James thinks that's a new one. Everyone knows that one. I can't believe he nearly fell for it. But I did. So what happened was this. As I have got older, I have found myself, much to my family's chagrin, I found myself ordering quite a lot of clothes off Facebook adverts. Now, the great thing about this is that the algorithm, and I know it's responsible for, Donald Trump and Brexit and all that kind of thing, but there are silver linings. The algorithm really gets my particular sense of style. So I quite often now get sent adverts for precisely the sort of clobber that is going to tickle my fancy, because it knows what I've looked at in the past, you see. So I'm quite partial to knitwear. I'm turning into Alan Partridge, aren't I? I'm quite partial to nice knitwear, poshish knitwear. Poshish. It's not even a word, is it? Poshish knitwear. I'm quite partial to knitwear, and it also knows my trainer tastes. So if New Balance trainers release a particularly fetching new shoe, it will pop up on my Facebook within hours of being launched, and I can just click away on it and get on it. And also I've started buying quite posh socks. I checked with the producer about whether I should tell you how much I'm spending on socks at the moment for a pair of socks. Because my whole life has been spent searching for the perfect sock. And I've gone through quite a long period of buying a lot of socks from TK Maxx and almost treating them as disposable socks. But that's not very good for the environment. So socks now, I'm getting sent some lovely stuff for socks. Facebook's great. You keep all your profiles private, so you're never going to get bombarded by Dominic Cummings or anything like that. And you just get this excellent shopping-based algorithm. And so it was that I found myself looking at what I believed to be the website for a well-known Savile Row tailor. It was Hackett. Hackett is the label Hackett. I've got a nice coat from Hackett, so I thought, I must. I didn't buy it online, but I might have filled in a 10% discount, so they know I like Hackett stuff, right? And so I went to I just saw this website. It said we've got an end of I've got an end of season sale. We've got a massive clearance sale. at Hackett. And now this happened about a month after I had stumbled across genuinely massive discounts on another Savile Row tailor that was, I think, had gone under, and they were selling off the stock that was left over. And I checked, and it's posh, and they were by royal appointment. And I think the jumper I've got on now is one of them. And it was really nice gear. Don't at me about my jumper if you're watching this on YouTube. I like it. And so I thought this is all perfectly normal. And the discounts were extraordinary. And this is where I would have thought too good to be true. But remember, a month previously, I'd secured some fairly special discounts on some rather lovely knitwear. So I went through this website, this Hackett website, and I was ordering everything. I ordered about probably several £100, if not £1,000 worth of gear. I probably would have moderated my order a little bit later in the process when I'd seen. But we're talking like you're paying 20% of cost, like 80% discounts, right? And I thought, oh, well, Mrs. O'Brien's probably going to tell me off. But when she sees how much clobber arrives, she's going to, that's 2 years worth of shopping you've done in one box. And I got to the payment page. You know, when you get to the end of it, even if you're just ordering food, you get to that final confirm payment page. And if I'd been a bit distracted, you know, if I'd been watching telly with a laptop on my lap, or possibly if I'd had a drink, and I just wasn't fully firing on all cylinders, I don't think I would have noticed that the account into which I was about to pay £1,000 was a PayPal account. And I just smelt a rat. And I think it was even someone's name on a PayPal account. And I just thought, there's no way that Hackett would have a PayPal account with someone's name on it. Just to that final click. And then, having smelt a rat, I went to look at the official Hackett website, which was identical to the one that I'd been looking at, but without the discounts. So the one I'd looked at, they'd slightly changed the web address. Do you see what I mean? So it's like one character or something like that. Now, something like that, I presume, is only up and running for a fairly short period of time before it gets spotted and closed down. But before it gets spotted and closed down, old Muggins here could have given them £1,000 of my hard-earned. And it was so easy to do and so cleverly targeted because of my own shopping habits. And I'm delighted, Marnie, that you find it so funny that I think I've got... She says, thank you, James, for giving me a lovely giggle at the thought of you having a style, especially in knitwear. Very fondly yours, Marnie in Glastonbury. Well, I think that's a little bit unnecessary. I have a very particular sense of style, Marnie, as you can tell by watching my clips or catching the show on YouTube. A very particular sense of style. And just to be clear, this would have been about 2 years' worth of shopping for me. I'm not in the habit of dropping £1,000. But I'd have got like 8 pairs of trousers, 2 jackets, 10 shirts. So it would have been literally all the clothes I needed for 2 or 3 years. And just in that final moment, I got the sense of fishiness, and I pulled out of the deal. But the website looked exactly the same. The clobber was exactly the same. The only thing that was different was the discount, and then of course the PayPal thing. It is coming up to 12:15. So if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. What happened to you? And ideally something that most of us might not know about. Something that so 2 things I want. You can't quite believe, like me, you're cocky enough to think you'd see through any scam, but you didn't. So you're stunned that it happened to you. 0345 6060 973, and or it's something that you realistically think other people listening may not know about. Oh, and speaking of scams, what do you think me and King Charles have got in common with regard to scams that are in the newspaper today? This is extraordinary, actually. Me and King Charles and I. The King and I. There you go. Got there in the end. Someone should write a musical. What do you think the King and I have got in common with regard to online scams? It's quite big, actually. I'll tell you after this. 12:18 is the time. So what do you think me and the King have got in common when it comes to scams? Well, they finally noticed that Amazon is full of fake books. So on this occasion, they're selling books full of fake news about the King's cancer diagnosis. And there's one about me on Amazon as well. Did you know this? So one of the lovely things about Christmas for me is the number of people who send me pictures of presents that involve my book or my board game. I really love it. I don't know why. It's become a Christmas tradition for me to scroll through Twitter liking all of the pictures of your presents. But there were a couple this year that stopped me in my tracks. Someone's mum had bought them a book off Amazon, thinking, having asked for, could I have James O'Brien's new book, How They Broke Britain, still in the Sunday Times top 10 yesterday, some 3.5 months after publication, an extraordinary achievement by any stat. No, sorry, I'm getting carried away. Can I have James O'Brien's new book for Christmas, please, Mum? And so Mum went on Amazon and ordered what they thought was James O'Brien's new book for Christmas. But it's a fake. There's a fake biography of me on there called James O'Brien, The Biography. It came out the month before my last book did. And it is entirely lifted from Wikipedia. So I imagine that you order it and they just print off a copy. Somebody somewhere, some scammer, prints off a copy of this book, James O'Brien, The Biography, and they charge you, where's the price? £9.99. So listen, one of the funniest things about my books on Amazon, if you want a giggle, is the 1-star reviews from people who've never read a book in their life, let alone read my book. So quite a lot of gammony racist types go on and give a 1-star review, and they're hilarious. I mean, never intentionally hilarious, but certainly unintentionally hilarious for two reasons. Number one, the kind of literary standards of the posting, and number two, the idea that someone's life is so tragic that they're going to go pretend to have read a book by someone off the radio that they don't like. Oh, and number three, have a look at the other things they've bought. So if someone is giving me a fake 1-star review on Amazon, their shopping history, if they've got a shopping history at all, because some people have set up the accounts especially, but the shopping history will include, it will say, they'll have like quite detailed accounts of their last motor oil purchase or a torch. They'll say like 2 paragraphs on a torch. They're not the kind of people who look like they read excellent best-selling political books on a very regular basis. But these reviews for the James O'Brien biography, they're outstanding. Listen, I'm sorry, but this is from Francis. As much as I like James O'Brien, I will not pay $9.99 for a book not much bigger than a pamphlet. And that's a verified purchase. So poor old Francis has bought. This is a verified purchase as well. This is a scam. Do not buy. And this is from Mr. Abbot. This is a scam. It's just a pamphlet of 30 pages copied and pasted from Wikipedia. Avoid at all costs. And then another one from Jake. Do not buy. This is fake. His book is 30 pages. It's literally Wikipedia copy and pasted. So I imagine that that's what these books are that everyone's getting excited about today, because someone's gone on Amazon and seen all these biographies of King Charles that have been published. It's not new. You just get AI to do it, or you copy and paste it from Wikipedia, and you get sent. So you send off your 10 quid and they just press print and send you this crappy little pamphlet. It's terrible. So there you go. There's 4 people there, and God knows how many others. A complete scam. Do not buy it, whatever you do. But it goes to show how sophisticated these scams are. Yes, Loathe Thy Neighbour is legit, actually, Matt. That was an LBC marketing exercise. So that book was written under the auspices of the LBC brand. And it's quite good, but I don't think of it as a proper book. It is more of a pamphlet. It's like an extended essay. But it is real. But the one that's not real is the one that claims that it's my biography. And I mean, to be fair, I quite like the picture that they have illustrated it with, but it probably wouldn't be if I were to publish. My teeth look extraordinarily white, actually. I think they may have been photoshopped. It's probably not the picture I would choose to go on my official biography. I'd probably choose the one that's on the front of How They Broke Britain, actually. But anyway, I digress. Scams. I bet Patrick in Croxley Green can't even remember why he rang in. I do apologise for inflicting that upon you, Patrick, unprompted. But what made you pick up the phone in the first place?
Right, it's a bit like parking tickets, isn't it? It's only important to you. But just before last Christmas, I got scammed for $7,500.
Hang on a minute. Absolutely not. It's nothing like parking tickets. This is a warning to everybody else. A parking ticket. No one ever listens to a parking ticket phone-in and then thinks, oh, I won't park in a place where I'm not supposed to park again in case I get... How dare you come on and undermine the entire thesis of this hour? Carry on, honestly. Do you want to buy a biography while you're here?
I've just ordered it now.
Go on.
Yeah, no, just before last Christmas, I got scammed with a well-known online-only bank. Somebody rang up and said, there's 2 strange purchases on here.
Oh, yeah.
Accessed the app. So I didn't have to do anything. It jumped up on my phone, the app, and it showed it spent like $14.99 in Domino's. And I'm just joking. I don't even like Domino's.
Yeah.
So they said, there's another one here, which I need to, it looks like I might need to credit back to you. It's £7,500.
Right.
And literally, I got a bit worried about it because it seemed a little bit odd. It was in a shoe shop in Dubai.
Okay.
And I would never been to Dubai. Anyway, so literally in front of my eyes.
I'd never spent $7,500 on shoes. Would have been a more obvious response, I think.
That's like $3,500 a foot. So literally, but in front of my eyes, the balance went in my bank account for $7,500.
Right.
Now, when I reported it to this bank, they were convinced, and they were so adamant that I'd accessed something on there to allow them to do it. And I hadn't done anything at all.
Right.
This firm had actually accessed the app and the phone lit up, with the app in front of my face.
So it was the real app?
Yeah. So it's my well, it's not my bank anymore, but that particular bank. Yeah. So you look on it and you hit it, and obviously it brings up on the screen.
Wow.
And then as they're looking at it, I can see, when someone is typing, and they can you see things happening there. You can see. So it made sense. But whoever this was, and fair play, they were very, very clever. But they'd actually accessed it to take the money, and there was no code put in. No. Literally, I was.
Well, do you have facial recognition on it?
Well, on the phone.
Yeah. That might be relevant.
But the bank were adamant it's never, ever happened before. It couldn't have happened. You must have done something. But, yeah, it was... And I'm not an oldie. I'm not a youngie either. But,
sure.
I figured myself as being pretty clued up. I've been using online banking for 15 years. And this was just... But it was all so quick and so slick and so easy. And
what's the scam then? Because they put money in your account.
No. They basically took $7,500 out. They took it and it just went.
Right.
And then with a lot of battling, I was battling with the bank to get it back. And after a few weeks, I eventually did. And then the weirdest thing was I actually got a credit from this shoe shop in Dubai. And because of the interest rate, I actually ended up with more money than that was taken out. So I was up by about £7,800 on the deal in the end.
How bizarre.
But that was obviously something else.
But we still don't know how it worked then.
No, and then I've asked, and the bank, obviously, I'm not using them anymore, and they just say, it's never happened, it couldn't have happened.
They couldn't have got access to, I bet it's your facial recognition that somehow...
But they did give me, the bank did actually refund me in the end, but they were adamant...
But they do that, I think, just to make it go away, don't they? They probably, if you'd gone all the way to court, they may have had a case for saying, sorry, caveat emptor, you shouldn't have done what you did, it's not our fault. But... Equally, it costs them a lot less just to, and also they got it back from the original place. So how do you avoid that in the future for people listening? You just don't. They're never going to do that. The bank are never going to. So saying they're the fraud department ringing you, automatically suspicious. Automatically.
Well, this is it. Obviously, what I was told and advised to do, like everyone else is you hang up. Totally hang up and then call you back, no matter what happens. But
people, you've just broken my switchboard. Then I mean, it's full already, so it won't matter. But they do the thing where you think you have hung up, but you haven't. They have to hang up at the other end. So you need a proper dial tone, or you need any. So don't even do that. I wouldn't. I'd just wait. If they've got $7,500, you can fix it tomorrow or fix it in 2 hours' time. But it is there. I mean, it's so sophisticated that no one should be embarrassed or ashamed of being ripped off. That's my view anyway now. It didn't used to be. Deborah's pointed out that Amazon currently has a 2-book deal today, mine and David Cameron's, for $24.99 for the pair. Who's going to want to buy my book alongside David Cameron's? David Cameron's in my book as one of the men who broke Britain. But hey-ho, there's no accounting for taste. Ali's in Halifax. Ali, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. How are you?
Very good, mate. What's on your mind?
So I got done for £700 3 weeks ago.
How much?
WhatsApp.
How much?
700.
What happened?
So my uncle, who's obviously abroad, rang me up saying, I've got this urgent message from a friend of mine, long-time family friend. He needs some money desperately.
Right.
So I said, okay. He goes, I can't send it. Can you send it for me? So, he sent me a message, uncle. I rang my uncle, said, look, is this you? He goes, yeah. I got a message from so-and-so. You need to send him some money. I said, okay, leave it with me. I'll send the money. Can't send it via my bank. Wouldn't have it. So I said to my uncle, I can't send this. And he goes to me, here's a guy's number. Just WhatsApp him and sort it out with him. So WhatsApping this person who I thought was my uncle's friend.
Yeah.
Said, look, I can't send this money. They said, just send it to this other account. Sent it without thinking. And then they sent me a message saying, can you send me confirmation it's been paid? I said, well, here's a screenshot of my bank. I've sent it. And then they said, no, send something else. I said, look, don't mess me about.
Yeah.
I rang the number.
Yeah.
Actually got through to my uncle's friend. Apparently, somebody had somehow hacked his WhatsApp and been sending messages from the WhatsApp account to all his contacts, desperately asking for money.
Blimey.
So when I'm WhatsApping somebody on the computer, like you can do it now, I'm actually going through the fraudster. When I actually ring the number associated with a WhatsApp number, I actually speak to my
They must have been near
friend.
him, maybe, with their laptop. Must have been near him physically.
I mean, he's an elderly gentleman, so probably. But, I mean, when I rang them up, they said, we've had lots of people do this. They'd already, thankfully, logged it with the National Crime Agency, so I had the reference number.
Crikey.
But I'd already sent the money, and he was, really upset, saying, I said, look, don't worry about the money.
But you got it back?
You've been done over. Yeah, I rang Barclays, and it took about a couple of weeks. And the funny thing is, it was actually another Barclays account I sent the money to. So getting the money back was
straightforward.
that. But James, the sting in the tail is I work in cybersecurity.
No, mate.
Exactly.
Well, that proves the point, doesn't it?
Exactly. Even I got done over
because you thought WhatsApp's end-to-end encrypted, so you thought you'd be fine with that.
And I spoke to my uncle, and I trust my uncle implicitly, being a family member. I thought whatever information he gives me is always totally legit, and it's the hacking of the WhatsApp that got me. And when I rang the bank, just to make everybody aware, this actually it's going around the houses now. This scam, it's called a friends and family scam.
Yeah, no, I've heard of it.
Message from somebody.
Yeah, and you can say it's your child. I get them quite regularly, and I've got children of a relevant age who could conceivably have lost all their gear and ended up potless in the middle of nowhere. But I know that it's nonsense. And so one thing, what would you do then to advise? So what would you say to someone as a cybersecurity expert? What would you say to someone?
Don't say that. Watch my own back now.
Yeah?
I would just say, if you get a message like that, ring the person first to confirm it is a person you're speaking to.
The person you're giving the money to, not in your case, your uncle's not good enough. You need to get the number off your uncle's mate, off your uncle, and then ring him and say what's going on.
Well, my uncle is the person that gave me the number, so I just assumed them went on WhatsApp, but I should have actually rang the number first and then started conversing. So that's what I did,
Good Lord. Well, there you go. And if it can happen to you, it can happen to anyone. That was the crucial point of this conversation, because I've done it in the past, and people have rung in who were... I mean, you could say, and I mean this very kindly and generously, who did sound as if they might fall for a scam. Whereas if Ali works in the sector and I work in the media and what have you, then that shows how sophisticated these scams are. So there's no shame and embarrassment in this. 12:32 is the time. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. 12:36 is the time. I think I can run the risk of invoking the curse of O'Brien on this one, because she has just announced that she won't be standing at the next general election. But I met Tracy Crouch at a party, and I thought she was a brilliant, really lovely person and a really good politician. I always, my endless quest for likeable Tories, just in the interests of balance. But she has just added her name to the very, very long list of people Conservative MPs in particular, who will not be standing at the next election. I've just seen that on Twitter. 12:37 is the time. Noga Tarnopolsky is a freelance journalist currently in Jerusalem, and someone to whom I thought we could turn in pursuit of two things, really, Noga. First, an update, if you like, on what is happening now with regard to the bombardment of Rafah, and then, if there's time, a bit of a steer on how the unfolding situation is being greeted in Israel itself by the Israeli public, because we get sometimes a slightly skewed picture, I think, in the UK media. So let's begin with the bombardment overnight and what we know.
So there was a very elaborate operation overnight. But I don't know how other people hear it. When you say bombardment, I think I'm hearing like airplane bombings. In fact, this was a combined Secret Service, special ops, mostly ground operation. That included also bombardment. I think, as far to the best of my ability to understand, it had two aims. One general aim which is basically to crush what's left of Hamas leadership in the area of Rafah, where the Israeli authorities believe Hamas leaders have escaped to, mostly. The other was a complex operation that followed on very specific intel, and it was aimed at rescuing 2 Israeli hostages held by Hamas. And it was a successful operation, and 2 hostages came home. It's the first time Israelis have seen any hostages come home alive since November.
And the death toll, as far as we know?
Well, we don't know, and this is, again, a complexity. Hamas initially, like as the event had just finished or was still underway, said 50 people were killed. They specified in the operation to rescue the hostages. Then last I saw, the number had gone up to 68. The Israelis have not released any official numbers, but as you can see, my respected colleague Tal Schneider tweeting now, the Washington Post, for example, reported that 68 had died in the operation as if it were a matter of confirmed fact. Whereas these are figures issued by Hamas, and quite a few signal moments of this war, when there's been a significant amount of international media attention, Hamas have released either numerical information or general information that has turned out to be false, but once it's discovered to be false, the fake story has already made its way into people's hearts and minds.
Okay, so the truth has not got its trousers on when the misrepresentation is halfway around the world. But I think
it's a long way of saying to you, we don't yet know.
Okay, but the figure of 1.4 million displaced Palestinians, I think, is undisputed. That there are currently 1.4 million people,
possibly even more, maybe up to
sheltering in
1.7.
Rafah.
That's right.
Where, I mean, following Benjamin Netanyahu and Israeli coverage more closely than I can, where are these people supposed to go?
Well, that is the huge question, and that's the question that has provoked, I think, every single allied government, the British, the French, the Germans, the Americans, to really warn Netanyahu, who refuses to answer that question. He keeps talking very belligerently about an imminent an imminent Rafah operation, the absolute necessity of such, and so on. Every day he mentions this as if he were a general guiding the army. Fact of the matter is, there is no proposed solution. The Israelis have not said a word. There has been some vague talk of something impossible, which is, quote, they'll move up north. Well, there's really nowhere up in North Gaza where these people can go to, and it's also unclear that there's any way for them to get there. So this is the huge question. Even the Americans have said that a Rafah operation could be, and I'm quoting, a disaster. And they're really pushing Netanyahu for his own reasons of political survival, really unrelated to the war effort, and I think by now undisputably harming Israel's war effort, refuses to answer any questions about what might happen to bring this war to an end. And that includes a Rafah operation, because he believes that if the minute this war ends, the Israeli public will find some way to get him out of office. He's a hugely unpopular leader right now.
This is an extraordinary development, really, because any support for Israel's continued actions in Gaza, for example, in this country, is contingent upon a belief that provisions are in place for the evacuation of the Palestinian people. But as you're telling us, that there are no provisions in place, and Benjamin Netanyahu is not even pretending to answer the question anymore.
That's right. And I think it's important to underscore the tremendous harm that Netanyahu is causing his own nation, not only his generals in their effort to bring an end to this war, to conclude it, but his country, the country's international reputation, because he's talking so much about a Rafah operation that most people believe it's already underway, that Israel is blowing its way into Rafah. And so on the one hand, he's not doing it. He's just talking about it. And on the other hand, there is no plan there's no known plan, let's put it that way, for him to enable him or his army to do so. So it's a very complex and very chaotic, I would say, situation.
And I sense from what you've told us already that you think public opinion is shifting further against him. Is that correct? And what would the breaking point look like?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not so much what I think. This is the facts on the matter. There were 2 more polls published this weekend, so 2 days ago, that showed his party losing more than half of its power in Parliament, where elections held now. And he has only 32 seats. I think he has 34 seats out of 120 right now. So it would make him a non-viable candidate for prime minister. And that's what he's trying to push off. The Israelis, I think, maybe we should just remind people, Netanyahu came back to office about a year ago and immediately tried to overthrow the Israeli system of government. He's on trial and he was trying to protect himself. So when this war happened, when it started on October 7th, he was already an extraordinarily unpopular prime minister. And since then, the way that he has undertaken the war and his absolute screaming failure to take any responsibility for the disaster that befell Israelis has caused him to tumble. I mean, 80% of Israelis consistently in every poll want him to be gone.
And finally, do we have any indication of what public support in Israel for a ceasefire looks like at the moment?
So, yeah, there's less polling, to be honest with you, about that. But the last serious poll I saw also Friday from the Israel Democracy Institute showed that just more than half the Israelis say that the most important aim of the war has to be the return of the hostages. And that implies, I don't know about a ceasefire, a truce, but certainly a stop in the fighting to bring them home. And that is more important than the other war aims articulated by this government, which include, crushing Hamas, killing its leadership, destroying all of Hamas's weaponry and so forth. Most Israelis see the number one aim as stopping the disaster and bringing the hostages home.
Noga Tarnopolsky, many thanks indeed. Noga, as I said, a freelance journalist currently in Jerusalem and, as you gathered, keeping a very close eye on developments both in Israel and, of course, in Gaza, where the ground offensive, as it were, hasn't even begun yet. As she reminded us, 1.4 million plus Palestinians living there, tens of thousands, I think 17,000 children without parents in Gaza, according to the United Nations, and warnings of even greater catastrophe just around the corner. Warnings that are not really, or warnings from Western leaders that are simply not being heeded by Netanyahu. So listen, I know I have to take it on the chin when I criticise Benjamin Netanyahu. You can call me anti-Semitic, but that's the question. It's always the question that defines and determines the salience of the point being made. Where are they supposed to go? If he's not answering that question, you can't support him unless you are supporting the idea of 1.4 million people being targeted and attacked with nowhere to go to. Where are they supposed to go? That's the question today. That's the only question really that matters. And I will just say again that for those of us who worry what this war is going to do to Israel for the decades to come, what it's going to do to Israel's international standing, what it's going to do to the status of the country in the minds of younger people in particular, I really, really can't think of a more grim indicator of that particular issue than the kind of characters who have allied themselves to Netanyahu in particular in the UK media. They are not friends of Israel. They're not friends of the Jewish people. They are just motivated by a shared enemy, if you like, and in some cases rank Islamophobia. And, some of the receipts are in plain sight. It's 12:47. 12:51 is the time. We haven't done one of these for a while, have we? Woke Watch. So I don't know if you were aware of the fact that last Sunday, as in a week ago yesterday, the HMS Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier was supposed to begin its deployment to a huge NATO exercise just off Norway, but it was cancelled at the last minute after an issue was found with a coupling on the starboard propeller shaft. And yesterday, the HMS Prince of Wales, which was due to replace HMS Queen Elizabeth in exercise Steadfast Defender, also failed to set sail for a NATO exercise. So that's 2 massive aircraft carriers, both of which have not been sent to a huge NATO exercise just off Norway because of, well, in one case, definitely a mechanical fault. And I think in the case of HMS Prince of Wales, still as yet undefined factors. So quite a big deal, you'd agree, right? Huge aircraft carriers, faults, NATO exercise. Grant Shapps is currently the Secretary of State for Defence. And on the morning after, an aircraft carrier that failed to set sail for a NATO exercise a week after its sister ship pulled out because of a mechanical fault, Grant Shapps has written an article for the Daily Express that appears under the headline, "Woke Culture is Poisoning Common Sense." The Secretary of State for Defence is writing for a comic about wokeness the morning after a Royal Navy aircraft carrier failed to set sail for a NATO exercise a week after its sister ship pulled out because of a mechanical fault. And that concludes the latest edition of
Woke Watch.
12:53 is the time. Now, speaking of keeping an eye on things, Fergal Sharkey has latterly become the patron saint of water cleanliness and the bête noire, the scourge of greedy water companies polluting our waterways. So I thought I would just check in with him about the story elsewhere in today's news about water company bosses possibly facing limits on the enormous bonuses that they trouser, even while pumping shocking amounts of sewage into our waterways. And thankfully, Fergal has made himself available. So am I going mad, Fergal, or is there an air of deja vu around this announcement?
I have a sneaking suspicion, James, I'm about to help you sell another few copies of How They Broke Britain. You are right in that today's announcement absolutely replicates the same announcement they made 12 months ago, but did nothing about. That was 6 months after they announced they were actually going to sell water company bosses to jail, but did nothing about. And that comes 2 weeks ago, they announced they were stopping self-monitoring by water companies, the very same announcement that they made 3 years ago. It's just another illustration. There's a complete void of talent and ability, and they just...
Also taking us all for mugs as well, because, you know, without you to point this stuff out, some people might fall for it. Oh, I think the phone line. Well, we got the gist of it, didn't we? We got the gist of it put across. I very kindly put in a plug for my book. Obviously, I'm very uncomfortable plugging it myself, so I'm very grateful to Fergal for mentioning it. But I do indeed address some of these issues. I think the technology has defeated us. But you heard him there in a nutshell. They've done it before. It reminds me a bit of when one of my daughters was very young, and she asked me if she could spend her birthday money again. So she got some money for her birthday and she went out and bought something, and then she saw something else that she wanted and she said, "Can I spend it again, Daddy?" That's what they're doing. That's what they're treating you like. The bonus ban for water bosses who break rules has already been announced about 30 times previously. Have we got him back? We'll have one more go on this before the Gremlin. They're coming to get you, Fergal. But they're taking the British public for mugs is really the gist of what you're telling us.
Listen, they completely are. It's now just got to the point, James, where it was clearly absolutely devoid of intellect and the ability to generate any original creative thought at all. And bearing in mind, the one bit that made me giggle this morning when I saw this, bearing in mind the Secretary of State for the Environment is actually married to the head of planning and infrastructure for Anglian Water, a company fined £2.5 million last year. By my guesstimate, spent nearly 500,000 hours dumping sewage into the environment. I assume he has told his wife he's going to deprive her of her bonus this year.
Absolutely extraordinary. And just in conclusion, that most people probably don't realise that these companies have been paying their executives massive bonuses even as they were breaking the law.
I think we're looking at something in the region of £26 million over the last 3 or 4 years alone. Bearing in mind, these companies have taken out $72 billion in dividends and leaving these companies $60 billion in debt. It's a shambles from one end to the other.
Well, it is that. And just out of interest, do you like the look of any of the opposition parties on this?
I'm waiting for somebody to step up to the plate, show real leadership, and ultimately, and it's across the board, James, this country is in too much pain right now, and we need somebody to show us there is hope and that there's a brighter future somewhere down the line. I'm looking for someone to step up and start delivering.
Well, Fergal Sharkey speaking, I think, for millions of us on the bigger picture of the state of the nation, as well as the detail of this latest story about another bonus ban for water bosses who break rules. I love the way he just drops it. That was 12 months ago, that was 6 months ago, that was 2 weeks ago, that was 3 months ago. Stop me if you think you've heard this one before, because you have. Fergal Sharkey there. So I squeeze in Marion Swindon. Marion, can you do it in a minute, Marion?
Yes, absolutely.
Take it away.
I was the victim of a port out scam on the 20th of December.
What's the port out scam?
It's when somebody requests to my phone company that they move my phone number to another phone company.
Oh.
So they sent me a link saying that I needed to update my payment details with my phone company.
Right.
And I did. I did need to add a new card, and I kept thinking, I'll do that. So one evening, probably a glass of wine in, I clicked the link, gave them my email address, my password, my bank details.
Oh.
Yeah. So they logged into my phone company. They asked for my number to be transferred to a different network.
Good Lord.
And they then downloaded my my banking app.
From your phone?
Yeah. And they didn't have my phone. They just had my phone number.
They had your phone number, so the app would recognize. Oh my days!
Yes,
logged on.
Absolutely.
How much did they get?
They luckily, when it actually happened, I was in town and my phone went dead. Absolutely nothing. So I went straight into the shop of this phone company. Can I tell you who it was? O2.
Yeah, go on.
And
you just said it then before I gave you permission.
I did it.
You did. You said, "Can I tell you who it was?" O2. You could get me into all sorts of trouble.
I'm sure that's not how it happened.
Go on. Sheila's here now, so go on. Give us the punchline.
I teach cybersecurity.
Oh no, not another one. This is this is the whole show to everyone who's been scammed as a cybersecurity expert. Honestly, if you missed any of today's show, you missed at least 3 cybersecurity experts and me, all revealing that we could have been scammed. You can listen back on Catch. Actually, Ali in Halifax was scammed. Alifax, as I call him. You can listen back on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Always insist on ringing them back from a different phone number. That's one little thing you can do, but there's loads of other guides online. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty. 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 Now it's time for Sheila